This is not a red versus blue issue. This is a morals issue. And to the politicians that believe that their right to own a gun comes before our lives, get ready to get voted out by us.
The March for Our Lives movement seems to be taking a step towards real change when it comes to tougher gun laws. There's already evidence of that. The movement's concrete policy demands, has a list of 5 of them, all work within the scope of the Second Amendment as currently interpreted by the Supreme Court. But former Supreme Court Justice John Paul Stevens argues the best way for this movement to achieve its aims is demand a repeal of the Second Amendment, as it would eliminate the only legal rule that protects sellers of firearms in the United States, unlike every other market in the world. Joining me now to discuss the merits of this argument, Lawrence Tribe, professor of constitutional law at Harvard, and Anna Galland, executive director of MoveOn.org. Professor Tribe, I take it you think this is a bad approach.
I do. When I listen to the survivors of the massacre at Stoneham Douglas, people like Sarah Chadwick and Emma Gonzalez and others, I'm inspired partly by their passion, but also by their practicality. I mean, they realize that it's money, like money in the story that you just had before the break, money that is pouring into the NRA and then in the form of dark money into various campaign coffers. That's what's calling the shots. If energy is put in the impossible task of getting rid of the Second Amendment, instead of the quite possible task of making gun safety a single issue matter, the way gun rights have become on the other side, and really voting out the people who are too spineless to pay attention, that'll get something done. But trying to get rid of the Second Amendment, which the Supreme Court has said is perfectly consistent with very substantial gun regulations, that seems to me to be a quixotic venture, not a good one. And in fact, it plays into the hands of the NRA when they argue that the Second Amendment is an absolute. It plays into the hands of those who say that every regulation of firearms is just a step toward confiscating your weapons and getting rid of the Second Amendment. That's not true, but it will seem true if we organize our efforts around the impossible task of getting rid of the Second Amendment.
And I know that MoveOn has been doing a lot of work on this issue. You guys have a petition right now about repealing the Second Amendment. What's your thought on it?
Yeah, so first of all, I should say, I think everyone can agree right now that everyone who's a person of good conscience, who cares deeply about the lives of our children, our grandchildren, ourselves, can agree that we absolutely need to vote out the people who are standing in the way of sensible reforms to our gun laws in this country. One of the most resonant chants at the march I attended here in Chicago was vote them out. So no disagreement there. I think the petition that you referenced, Chris, was a MoveOn member petition, and I can say what's coming up from my perspective is that we are in a real movement moment. This is a big, enormous, vibrant, fiery movement of Americans who've been inspired by the leadership of not only the Parkland students, but also young people around the country who've been fighting gun violence in all its forms for a very long time, groups like the Dream Defenders in Florida and others. And what's happening is that this real grassroots movement is surfacing organically all sorts of important policy demands. For example, universal background checks. For example, raising the age that you need to be to acquire a gun. For example, limiting weapons of war in our streets, getting rid of assault weapons. And yes, one of the new demands that I'm seeing coming up from some folks in the MoveOn member community, it's not at all a consensus position, is to actually repeal the Second Amendment. The fact that the conversation is moving there, including from people with the stature of Justice Stevens, is a testament to the incredible work these students have done, moving the conversation in the right direction.
So let's just say for a second, right, that stipulating that amending the Constitution at this point in the country as polarized as we have it, with the thresholds that exist, is really hard. Basically well nigh impossible at the moment, it looks like. But Professor Tribe, to sort of Anna's final point there, It seems to me, so forget about like, should we pursue this to practically aim? But just as a declaration of principle, what it seems to me, what Justice Stevens is saying and what others are saying is that what we're saying is that like we just reject the fundamental content here. That we all have to kind of bow and scrape before the gun owners and say things like, I respect the Second Amendment, but, comma, as opposed to, I think there are a lot of people who feel like guns are bad. There shouldn't be a lot of guns. People shouldn't have guns. Maybe it was a good idea at the time. I reject it. What's wrong with that as a sort of North Star?
I think it's the wrong North Star. I mean, I'm in favor of every one of the things that Anna lists. Universal background checks, getting rid of weapons of war on our streets. All of those things are great. But all of those things will be harder to do if we weaponize the crazy argument of the NRA that those are all steps toward getting rid of all guns. You know, in a world that was as peaceful as I'd like it to be, nobody would have a gun. That's not our world. Our culture is steeped in guns. I love the idea of setting up a North Star, a lodestar. But the lodestar should not be something that is so out of reach that these kids who are so passionate will simply become disillusioned. I don't want them to reach for something that's impossible. And I don't want them to buy the idea that if personal liberty to many people in this country includes the idea of having a weapon at home, a firearm at home to protect you as a matter of self-defense. I don't want them to think that as long as that's part of our culture, we have to be awash in guns and we have to allow the AR-15s on the street. It's not an either-or.
Anna, do you see part of the job of Move On Others as thinking of a sort of alternative world that we could inhabit?
Yeah, I mean, I was going to say, I think the North Star that the students are setting out for all of us is save our lives. That's the North Star.
Right,
that's the thing that's the challenge they're putting out to us. And I do think the role of organizations, institutions, groups that are out there to support the organizing energy that these students are calling forth is to help find imaginative ways that we can live into the world that we need. I think one of the important things for all of us to understand is it's not enough to say no in this era of catastrophic attacks on all fronts from the Trump administration, from the NRA and others. We have to talk about what we want to see, and what we want to see is a country that's safe for everyone.
All right, Lawrence Tribe. Sorry, Lawrence, I have to go. I have to hand the show over to Rachel. Lawrence Tribe and Anna Galland, thank you for joining us. Everyone, by the way, should read Justice John Paul Stevens' amazing dissent in the Heller case, which is the big gun case in 2008. It's a great read, very convincing in my mind. That is all in for this evening. The Rachel Maddow Show starts right now. Good evening, Rachel.
Good